if we contrast this divine version of endless giving to what we know as someone that gives, we can never truly understand what Al-Wahaab means. Because there's no human being on this earth that can perpetually give when they're not being asked, or they're not receiving something in return, or they're not compensating for something. Everybody gives with an expectation to gain something in return. A teacher teaches a student, but receives a wage, receives prestige and status and loyalty. A parent raises the child with compassion and mercy, but in the end they're expecting the child's righteousness, the child's obedience. They're expecting that child to do something for them in the long run. Whether we admit that or we refuse to admit that, that's this reality. Everybody does something for another thing in return. And this is why Wahaab is so distinct. Al-Wahaab gives again and again, without being asked, without being owed, and without being diminished. The Iman that we have today, have we actually earned the Iman that we have? It's an interesting question. How often do we think about the more abstract blessings that we've been given in abundance and ask ourselves, what did we do to earn those blessings? What did me and you do to be Muslims living in the UK? Thousands of years after the Prophet's conveyance of the divine message. What have we done to deserve this blessing of divine guidance? We're able to pray. Was this something that was guaranteed? Was this something that we earned through our hard work and labor? Allah chose to guide us while others in the world, they wander in a misguided fashion. Allah chose us to give us purpose and meaning to our lives, while others, they search to fill that void in their heart with something of this world. Did we purchase that guidance? Was it something we bought with our wealth? Was it something we earned through our actions? These aren't things that we earned or we deserved. These are things Allah gave to us, despite the fact that we did nothing to warrant the giving of those things. Because He is Wahaab. He doesn't need a reason to give. He doesn't need someone else to show Him a favor to return a favor. He doesn't give with the expectation of receiving something in return. And this is among the distinguishing factors that point to the essence of Al-Wahaab and why it's a remarkable name. So before being asked, Allah gives. Before being compelled, and Allah can never be compelled, He gives. Even if the recipient doesn't deserve it, Allah still gives. How many non-Muslims who are drowning in disobedience and tyranny still have the most lush houses, have the most expensive clothing, have endless financial capacity, but they live a life of disobedience? Because Allah gives without taking into consideration the religious orientation of that person. That's what makes him Al-Wahaab. It's a perpetual state of giving. In the Quran, this term is closely associated with those blessings that are huge in meaning, but yet they're often overshadowed. Children, spouses, alleviation during heightened difficulty and darkness. Allah uses the word that wahabna, we gave. And this is from the word hiba once again. And we're going to take a look at some of these examples in today's lesson. So it's important that we really internalize this. That in our own personal lives, we should ask ourselves, when was the last time we gave or the last time we were given? And what were some of the factors and the caveats involved in that particular scenario of giving? Did I give while having no expectation in return? Did I give because that person did something for me? Did I give because there was something subtle that I needed, that I would receive down the line, maybe 10 or 15 years later? We all have motives and agendas when it comes to giving. It's the nature of human beings. And that's what makes Allah Wahaab. None of these things faze Him, subhanahu. There's no compelling reason for Him to give. He gives because of His essence. While we as humans, we give because fundamentally we need something in return. طيب. The Prophet Zakaria, in Surah Al-Anbiya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He paints to us a vivid image of the difficulty, the pain and the sorrow the Prophet Zakaria he was engrossed in. He says, وَزَكَرِيَّا إِذْ نَادَى رَبَّهُ. When Zakaria, he called upon his Lord, رَبِّ لَا تَذَرْنِي فَرْدًا. Do not leave me alone. وَأَنْتَ خَيْرُ الْوَارِثِينَ. And you're the best of inheritors. What's meant by this, don't leave me alone? To leave a person alone is a very strong phraseology. Loneliness is a very damning thing. Why did Zakaria consider himself to be alone? Even though he had a spouse, even though he had companions. Why did he say, oh Allah, don't leave me alone? Anyone? Any thoughts? He didn't have children. He wasn't given offspring. And this, it pained him. It devastated him. So much so that despite people being around him, he was overwhelmed with loneliness. Sometimes you can have lots of people around you and still feel lonely. Loneliness isn't always defined by people being in your presence. It's a void deep within the heart that isn't filled. And then Zakaria makes a heartfelt supplication. He says, رَبِّ لَا تَذَرْنِي فَرْدًا وَأَنْتَ خَيْرُ الْوَارِثِينَ. Oh Allah, do not leave me alone while you are the best of inheritors. And we can't begin to imagine the level of pain and anguish that must have drove the Prophet Zakaria to make this dua. We can't begin to imagine the circumstances under which he made this supplication. And it's often those du'as that are made under the most intensified circumstances that have the greatest outcome. And Allah responds with urgency. فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُ يَحْيَى. So we granted him Yahya and we responded to his call with urgency. And the word for granted here is wahabna. From wahaba yahibu, which Allah's name originates from. So Allah is teaching us glimpses of His never-ending ability to give. He's teaching us what it means to be Wahab. Look at the life of Zakaria and you will see how I was Wahab to him. And I've been Wahab to many other prophets, many righteous people who walk this earth, many non-Muslims who transgressed, but I showed them mercy because I'm Wahab. My giving is something that's endless and perpetual. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at a time where there was no medical hope, there was no worldly solution, Allah creates the impossible for Zakaria. Because he is Wahab. And this is when Allah gave him Yahya. Despite him being of elderly age, having no hope of conceiving a child, drowning in complete misery and despair. But he called to Allah sincerely, and Allah responds by saying that I will give you a child because I'm Wahab. So when causes fail, Wahab comes to life. When the doors in this life shut in our faces, Al-Wahab materializes. So we learn from the example of Zakaria alayhi salam that in moments Allah gives us things that we least expect. And it's the nature of human being that when we go through back-to-back troubles, unforeseen calamities, we least expect goodness. Life has become so pear-shaped, things are going so wrong that there's no way anything good is going to come out of my life in the interim. And it's in those moments that believers are reminded through these stories, Allah is Al-Wahhab. And sometimes, because difficulties appear occasionally in our lives, we forget that blessings are perpetually being showered upon us. I mentioned this in one of the previous lessons. Amidst going through some darkness and some despair, we forget about the millions of bounties and favors that Allah has given us that we enjoy with every breath that we take. And we're reminded He's Wahhab. Another example, and this is quite fascinating, is it's in Muslim, where Anas ibn Malik, he said that a man came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this man wasn't a Muslim. And this was during a time period where Islam was spreading throughout the Arabian Peninsula. People knew who the Muhammad was, that he was somebody who claimed prophecy. And lots of people, they were flocking towards his divine message. And he was respectful, he had impeccable character. The people around him idolized him and venerated him. And they were willing to die in protection and preservation of him. So this man approached the Prophet ﷺ. Not being among the ummah, the Prophet not knowing him, having no familial ties to him, and he asked for sheep. He asked for some sheep, some animals that he could slaughter and he could feed to his family. Imagine somebody coming up to me and saying, buy me a month's worth of shopping. No salam, no dua, never seen this guy before, doesn't speak, might not speak my mother tongue, I have no affiliation with him, buy me a month's worth of shopping. How are you typically going to respond to that? Is money growing on my trees at home? Well, why are you asking me for this? We have a raw phrase in Punjabi for that, yeah? Is money growing back in back garden for this, yeah? So, but the Prophet ﷺ, Anas says, the Prophet ﷺ didn't even hesitate. فَأَعْطَاهُ غَنَمًا بَيْنَ جَبَلَيْنِ. So he gave him sheep in abundance that filled the space between two mountains. Allahu Akbar. This is the wording. The Prophet gave him until the space between two mountains was filled. And the man returned to his people, bewildered, in awe. And this is what he said to his people. He says, Ya qawm, O my people, aslimu, embrace Islam. فَإِنَّ مُحَمَّدًا يُعْطِي عَطَاءً مَا يَخَافُ الْفَاقَةِ. For Muhammad gives with such generosity, it's as if he has no fear of poverty. Allahu Akbar. And it's because of this action that an entire populace, it flocked into Islam. Very powerful report. What drove him to give? What drove him to give despite the fact that he had limited resources and capacities? What drove him to give despite the fact that he didn't know this person? What drove him to give bearing in mind this person was a nobody? It's because he was influenced by Allah's endless giving on him. The same way the one above the heaven, he shows you hibas in every facet of your life. It's incumbent upon you that you shower from what Allah has given you upon the people. That you share those favors and bounties. And this is one of the things that we learned throughout the series. That there are elements of Allah's names that we can become inspired from. Allah is all giving. And this, it shocks our system to the core. That why are you hoarding your wealth? Why are you preventing yourself from giving to those in need? When somebody asks you for something who seems genuine, why are you reluctant? What's stopping you? What's shackling you? Is it the greed for wealth? Is it that gluttony that's become cultivated in the depths of your heart? Is it that fear that my wealth may diminish? So here the Prophet ﷺ, he completely embodied these glimpses of Al-Wahaab that we've been exploring in today's session. He embodies those meanings. Generosity isn't bound by need or expectation. So Allah inspired the Prophet through this quality of his of Al-Wahaab, reflecting his nature. And the Prophet ﷺ was known by this quality throughout the East and the West. It's what people knew defined him and phased him, that he was one that gave. As they said, those that take, they live better. But those that give, they sleep better. It's a famous phrase. Yeah? Giving is better than taking. But we live in a society that teaches us to take. Take and take till you become rich. Some Muslims, I've had Muslims quote this, that if you behave like you're poor, you'll remain rich. It's famous. This is the mindset of the capitalist Western system. It's cultivated in the heart and minds of Muslims. Yeah? The goal is to become rich. Everything's based on self-interest. This whole concept of giving without reason or expectation or boundaries, it's become alienated in our day and age. The last example I want to look at is a very famous verse. It's in chapter 25 of the Quran where Allah says, رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ ذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ. Very famous. Some of the brothers here might be getting teary-eyed. It's probably the dua they made before marriage. No? This dua is often made when you want to look for a spouse, you want children. Our grandparents tell us, recite this dua regularly. If you read this dua with conviction, Allah will give you a good spouse. Allah will give you children in abundance. It's a dua where a certain group of people said, O our Lord, grant us from our spouses and our offspring comfort to our eyes. Yeah? It's recited in multiple mosques throughout lots of different gatherings because people are always in pursuit of righteous offspring. People always want to have good spouses that aid them in leaving behind a legacy. So this dua is something that we do ratta of all the time. Read and read and read. طيب? But what's interesting here, the word Rabbana hab lana, hab, from the word hiba. hab. Allah Azza wa Jal uses the word wahaba yahibu to send to us a direct, stark message that your spouses and your children are a gift that you didn't deserve. You didn't earn. You didn't work towards, but I gave you because I'm al-Wahhab. You can have as much money as you like. You're never going to be able to buy children. You can be as renowned and as complimented by people as you like, but you're never going to earn a righteous spouse through that. It's Allah that gives those things in His own divine, remarkable manner. That's why He's Al-Wahhab. So Allah says that a group of righteous people who Allah describes in Surah Al-Furqan as Ibadur Rahman, the slaves of Ar-Rahman. Allah mentions a host of qualities they have. They walk on the earth with humility. They pray. And the list is endless. And towards the end, Allah mentions that this is a prayer that they are known to make. They say, Oh Allah, through your act of Wahhab, give us spouses and offspring that bring comfort to our eyes. Coming from the same root of Al-Wahhab. These are gifts from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not something we can control, something we can earn. And it's teaching us believers to ask Al-Wahhab, not merely the provider. And we often find when we ask Allah for something that we long for, because we know of its fundamental value, we often use the word Razzaq, the one who gives rizq. And loosely, these things are also rizq. But what distinguishes Razzaq from Al-Wahhab is that even though Allah is Razzaq, you have to chase the rizq for Al-Razzaq to respond. You can't sit at home and expect wealth to come to your doorstep. You can't sleep in and then ask yourself, why don't I have money to pay the bills? You have to put in the work and only then you earn the fruits of labor. But Al-Wahhab is different. Whether you sleep all day or you sit inside the confines of your home without leaving your house, Al-Wahhab will continue to give you through His perpetual state of giving. And that's what distinguishes Al-Wahhab from Al-Razzaq. Al-Wahhab, there's nothing tied to His name. No conditions, no caveats. It's something that's endless and unconditional, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here, this verse sends us many subliminal messages. رَبَّنَا هَبَ لَنَا مِن ذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ. O Lord, grant us from our spouses and our offspring comfort to our eyes. So when we look at our children, we discuss with our spouses, we befriend good, noble people, we shouldn't look at them as a commodity. Something we've purchased and earned through our hard work. These narcissistic qualities is something this society does give birth to. But because you're successful in your own respected trade, because you're able to purchase a house, because you own your own car, now you think that you're able to own people. That people should show you a level of respect and prestige because you're, Faizaan, the businessman. Yeah? Or Benaris, the CEO, for example. We start to think that things are earned. They're controlled by us. But here we're told these things are all gifts from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're not commodities that we earn through our own hard work. So it really changes our outlook on life. It teaches us that when speaking and raising children, we shouldn't behave as if we're micromanaging our children. Disciplining, of course, is required. But sometimes if we behave with children as if we own them, which is very common in parenting. Many parents act and behave with their children as if they own them. The child is the parent's commodity. But Allah is teaching us here, that type of behavior is void of rahmah. That's not rahmah. That's you thinking that you are above them and you own them and you created them. And if it wasn't for you, then they would be nothing and they would have nothing. This is a mindset Islam nullifies. Islam teaches us through Allah's mercy and His constant state of giving. He gave you children. And He gave them to you. So this directs us strongly towards shukr once again. Everything we have is a gift. And the more we overshadow Al-Wahhab, the more we take what we have for granted. We see it as things that we've created. One of the things I've mentioned previously is in the current Western society, self-glorification is something that's required to broaden horizons. If you want to excel in the mainstream kind of workplace, You have to sell yourself. You know, I've got this degree, I speak this many languages, I lift this much at the gym, I've got different types of clothing, I've done it. You sell yourself to a point where you're not able to sell yourself anymore. Also, you can be promoted in the workplace. Your manager can take into consideration your strengths and your qualities. And if you don't do that, it's possible you might not get the job. Self-glorification is encouraged. It's advocated. And this leads to a person thinking that everything he has, it comes from his own hard work. That's the essence of Western materialism. The things you own, the things you've worked for, the things you invest in, the things you touch and feel, your worth and value slowly begin to be measured by those things. Because you've created them with your bare hands. And this is the essence of materialism. So here Allah is teaching us that that job you earned, the money you've accumulated, the good parents that people respect that you have, the children that people speak of with positivity, all of that came from Allah, not you, so thank Him. None of that is because of your hard work. You're merely a cog in the machine. Allah is the one that's operating the machine Himself, subhanahu wa ta'ala. What are the lessons we learn from Al-Wahaab? Number one, to reflect on abundance beyond material wealth. In a society that's focused heavily on productivity and achievement, the concept of Al-Wahaab, it reminds us that blessings, faith, guidance, health, gifts are not earned commodities. And I've touched upon this already. Everything we have around us are things Allah has given us, and are things that most of the time we don't deserve. Wallahi, if we really reflect deeply on where we are in life, what we've achieved, what we've accomplished, who we have around us, many of us would come to the humble conclusion that I don't deserve these things. But it's because of Allah's infinite mercy, His non-stop actions of Wahaab, that He's allowed us to have these things. So we have to reflect on the abundance that Allah showered upon us, and really put to aside this whole materialist kind of phenomena of the fact that we put in hard work, we gain, we accumulate. And those things will give us honor and integrity. That's what this society teaches us. Number two, generosity as a reflection of divine character. Volunteering, charitable donations, acts of kindness. These actions mirror Al-Wahaab. True generosity does not calculate risk, fear, or return. No? It's not a business venture where you become risk aversive because you don't want to sabotage your company profits. This is something dunyawi now. The act of giving, something that we are inspired by through the name of Al-Wahaab, none of those things are taken into consideration. I've mentioned this before. Among the people the Prophet went to personally and said, spend, was Bilal, a former slave who didn't possess anything for himself. But the Prophet ﷺ said, Anfiq ya Bilal, spend from your wealth, from what Allah has given you. So when it comes to giving to people, when it comes to helping the poor and needy, whether it's time, it's effort, it's skill sets, it's advice, it's just thoughts and ideas, this is something we should do without thinking. It's a no-brainer. A Muslim is a giver. And if we're not giving and we're taking, we need to step back and really question ourselves. That what are we doing? If every Muslim isn't giving back to his people, his community, his parents, his children in some way, and he's someone that prefers to take over giving, then it's time for serious questioning. Because we are not inspired by Allah's name Al-Wahaab if we're not givers. So we have to focus on being givers and not takers. Lastly, is gratitude in daily life. Allah's name Al-Wahaab encourages a mindset of gratitude, helping people focus on blessings that are often overshadowed and taken for granted. Just sit back, put pen to paper, and really come to the realization of what Allah has given us. We might think that we know everything. We might think we have lots of life experience. We might think I've been through so much. I know more than the average person. But when you put pen to paper, when it comes to counting your blessings, wallahi, our ignorance will come to light. We are ignorant when it comes to Allah's favor upon us. We are drowning in ignorance. The amount that Allah has given us does not even cross our mind. You know, from the functionality of our organs, the veins that exist in our ball socket joints, the ability to walk and see, the fact that we're breathing. With every breath we take, we're giving our body life. The fact that we're able to go home to our wife and children, our friends, our loved ones every day. The fact that we have jobs. The fact that we have clean clothing. The fact that we're not living in a war-torn country where our children are being orphaned and our wives are being widowed. These are just a fraction of blessings that I've mentioned here now. If we put pen to paper, there's not enough ink. There's not enough paper to write down what Allah has given us. That's how grateful we should be. And as Luqman alayhi salam was reported to have been said in a famous report, he said that I tried to thank Allah while exhausting every means possible. And I came to the conclusion that I can never thank Him. Because just the ability to thank Him warrants another thank. Allahu Akbar. The ability to thank Allah is a blessing. So how can you ever thank Him enough? So thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something we'll never be able to fulfill until death does us apart. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to connect to His name Al-Wahaab. We ask Allah ta'ala to make us of those who are givers and not takers. We ask Allah ta'ala to purify our intentions. وَأَقُولُ مَا تَسْمَعُونَ وَأَسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهَ لِي وَلَكُمْ وَأَتُوبُ إِلَيْهِ. I'll pass it around for reflections. Brothers, barakallahu feekum. Nice.